Welcome back, everybody, to the Anoncast. I'm your host, Alec Heidel. I apologize that I've been off the last couple weeks. My mother died recently, and so I want to tell everybody, if you have someone out there in your life who you're disconnected from, someone from your life who you wish you would see more of, don't waste any time. Now is the time to tell them how you feel, because you never know, there might not be a tomorrow, as was the case with my mother. Today, I am joined by a co-host. I'd like to welcome to the show, Anonymous Grassroots.
Greetings, world.
Anonymous Grassroots, by the way, is the chef who prepares our video podcast for us every week. This week, we are going to talk police use of force. Now, when you get started with police use of force, the first thing that you need to know and you need to understand is the use of force matrix, sometimes called the use of force continuum. I constantly hear in the news analysis of these police shootings. These police shootings are everywhere. Never have I heard one person mention the use of force matrix. And it is the linchpin in every single one of these cases. It's almost like discussing Jesus and never mentioning the Bible once. It's just not possible. So, on the use of force matrix, and there is a link in the show notes, and if you're watching the video podcast, it's up on your screen now. The use of force matrix is applied anytime an officer uses force above and beyond normal handcuffing. When an officer uses force, he's required in every jurisdiction to complete not only an incident report, but a use of force documentation report. Now,
so Alec, why is it that we don't ever hear about the use of force model? Is that just something law enforcement can't talk about, or do we have to look this up for ourselves, or what is the deal?
I'll be honest, I really don't know why it's not discussed. Every one of these police shootings, if you watch the video, you can apply the concepts of the use of force model, which I'll go over here momentarily, and you can straight up see if the force applied is proportionate to the resistance that the officer is observing. Now, I was a cop for almost 10 years. I have been in 100 use of force incidents. Every single one of these incidents that I have been in had to be justified by the use of force matrix. When you look at these shootings that are happening now, you can apply it to anything. You can apply it to Michael Brown. You can apply it to Eric Garner, and we'll go over this information later as it applies to these cases. But it's something that can be applied to any use of force, and why people aren't using it when they're explaining police shootings, I don't understand. Let me get started. Now, I'm going to do this backwards. We're going to start at lethal. Lethal, obviously, is when an officer feels that his life is in jeopardy, or that someone is demonstrating behavior which he believes could lead to serious bodily harm or death. Like if he approaches someone with a gun, if he approaches someone with a knife or a baseball bat. And whether there's a gun or a baseball bat, there are different rules within the matrix that govern whether or not you're allowed to use deadly force. Now, an example. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so how exactly do we apply the use of force model? Do we move up it and down it?
Yes, if you're looking at the use of force matrix on the screen, you'll see the different tiers: lethal, harmful, threshold, tactical, professional. Now, that column, that can be described differently. The terms that I was familiar with are active resistance, passive resistance, aggressive resistance, aggravated resistance, and you don't see that on here, but they apply in the same manner that you see lethal, harmful, threshold, tactical, and professional.
So we have 4 types of subjects. We have passive compliant, passive resistor.
And as far as the different genres or different types of resistance, the least resistant person will fall under what's considered passive resistance. Now, if you have a sit-in, if you have 20 people locking arms in front of a police station, that's passive resistance. They are just not doing what you're telling. They're staying there. They're not moving. That is passively resisting. And
That's level 2. Passive compliant is somebody who you tell them move over in front of your car and put your hands on the hood, and they do it. A passive resistor is someone who's at a sit-in. The officer is telling them what to do, and they're not offering being aggressive towards the officer. They're just not obeying his commands.
That's correct. Although I usually don't. When I have someone who's compliant, I typically did not consider them resistant, even though you can apply the chart to it. They were compliant, so therefore, to me, they were removed from this kind of situation. So above passive resistance, you have active resistance. You go to take someone into handcuffs, and they pull away from you. That's active resistance. Now, if you look at the chart, you can look across and you can see passive resistance, and on the other side, you can see it says contact controls. Right. Basically, that means you can use pressure points. You can grab somebody and pull them. And I'm not saying any of this is morally just. What I'm saying is this is police policy. Exactly. And don't think for a split second that I'm a police apologist, because I'm not. I see what police are doing out there to citizens who are demonstrating sometimes minimal resistance and getting maximum force. I'm not defending the police or this policy in any way, shape, or form, but I'm just explaining that this is the guide that police use, whether it's right or wrong. I believe it can be expanded to include, it doesn't have to be so black and white. There can be more shades of gray here than there already are. Right. There can be more levels that perhaps don't fall into one category or another.
Exactly, because things are dynamic.
Yes, things are dynamic and they constantly change. And the biggest problem I see is just poor decision making. Cops have this use of force model, and they either misinterpret force or they're anxiously looking to use force greater than the resistance demonstrated.
And that's something exactly what we're talking about right now. What type of force do you use with each type of subject you encounter?
Exactly. So let me go back to passive resistance. Like I said, you can use pressure points, you can grab somebody, you can move them, move up to active resistance. Okay. And it says here compliance techniques. That I somewhat disagree with, because compliance techniques is so broad. It's any technique used to gain compliance, and there
are, like you were saying earlier, there are subgenres in little minuscule details within each one of these. So a compliance technique would be, is that a baton at that point and meaty portions of the body?
Personally, I don't like the wording here, compliance technique. To move up from pressure points and whatnot, if you have someone demonstrating active resistance, and I'm going to tell you this straight up, regardless of what it says on the chart, that is going to be a green light for a cop to kick your ass, period. Because when you get into active resistance, you will find that the degrees of force used between maybe a single strike to the chest or a takedown, putting someone on the ground, it's kind of hard to say how much force is appropriate to use in those situations, and that's where it falls back on the judgment of the officer. And this is where we have all of our fucking problems with police, is judgment. That is what it comes down to.
Are you saying that with this type of a subject, you would then go to OC or pepper spray or the taser at that point? You
could. Stuff like that, really, I never saw the need to jump in and hurt people. I saw it every day. I saw other people do it. I saw people look for openings to use aggressive force. But in a situation like that, where you have somebody basically pulling away from you, I don't see any. You can, as per police policy, you can go to taser.
Hey, don't tase me, bro!
You can go to baton. You can go to OC. Morally, should you? Absolutely not. And I can hear it now. Any cops out there listening, hearing me talk, are cringing, saying I'm a fucking asshole, but this is reality. The reality is the majority of police should be able to gain control of mildly resistant subjects, pulling away, grasping, even someone trying to run. If you're actively running from the police, which we have a video we'll talk about here in a little while. If you're actively running from the police, then obviously they can't grab onto you. They're not going to grab a taser, or they shouldn't grab a taser if you're actively running, although that is policy. The reality is that active resistance does not mean they're fighting you. It means they're trying to get away. They're resisting your commands. So that takes us to the next step up, or assaultive, or bodily harm, or what I would call aggressive physical resistance. Aggressive physical resistance is someone's actively they're trying to hurt you. They're trying to physically assault you. They're battering you. And in those situations, there is not really much of a legal difference in the response between someone who is active and someone who is assaultive or aggressive towards you, I would have a hard time discerning the differences in the force used between those two. Now, once you get up to aggressive physical resistance or assaultive on the chart, they're trying to hurt you. It's game on for you to do what you need to do to take control of them. Now, notice we are not yet at lethal, but how many times have you seen or heard on the news a police officer is physically assaulted, aggravated physical resistance, or aggressive physical resistance, but yet they kill him. They shoot him. They do things they're not supposed to do. And you can always tell if the police acted appropriately or not by watching whatever video and looking at this use of force matrix. This use of force matrix will explain in context every one of these police shootings or aggressive police use of force incidents that we've come to. So the difference between the active resistance and the aggressive resistance is one's just trying to get away, pull away from you, not obeying your commands, and the other is trying to physically hurt you. But, like I said, note, you're still not allowed to kill people who are physically fighting you. Period. You're taught defensive tactics for a reason as a cop. Use them.
Okay, and so what is, how do we define deadly force, or when do we go to that lethal level? Is it in defense of self and others, or is it something else? At what point, do we move to deadly force, and what exactly does deadly force define to?
If a cop is killing somebody, it has to be in defense of himself or others for the fear of death or serious bodily harm. That's it. There are no exceptions.
What is serious bodily harm?
Serious bodily harm is someone has a baseball bat. They might not kill you, but they hit you in the head, they're going to cause serious damage. Mm-hmm. You're going to be toast for the rest of your life. So you're not...
Kicking a kneecap?
Permanent physical damage, yes. And I would say that the definitions of that really kind of vary. It depends on if you ask a cop or if you ask a state attorney. The reality is, if I punch you in the face and I leave a scar, that can be considered serious bodily harm to some people. And I've seen people go to jail on felonies because they broke the skin in a fist fight, So really, the police have a lot of ability to articulate what they want. All right, they can. If I were to arrest somebody who got in a fight, beat somebody up, even if they mangle the guy's face, that's going to be barely a felony. I would hate to put a felony on someone because that person's going to heal. They'll be fine. Misdemeanor battery. Okay.
What about a eye gouge?
An eye gouge, still, I don't see that being lethal. That's not lethal. I mean, as far as police response, an eye gouge, to me, still does not warrant lethal force.
Right.
That's just my opinion. But see, that's my definition. That's my own personal definition of serious bodily harm.
What we're looking at is by the books. Serious physical harm is permanent disfigurement. So gouging, removing somebody's eye, that is serious physical force. A broken pinky that is never going to be repaired to its same status is serious physical force. So what we're looking for is when the cops, they can't just snap kick somebody, and then conversely, you can't also snap kick them,
Yes, and basically the ambiguity of the definition. Ambiguity of the definition is really what we're talking about here, because you're not going to shoot somebody who's going around breaking other people's fingers.
They don't have
Bottom line. Right. And in situations where a person is unarmed, I really have to rack my brain to think of a situation that could be deemed lethal force.
Absolutely.
Other than there's a thing called officer-subject factors. So if the officer's 6 foot tall and he's going up against a 4 foot, 90-pound female, no chance in the world he's going to articulate the officer-subject factors that he was in fear for his life.
Now let's flip that.
Flip that. You've got a 4 foot, 90-pound female officer, and you've got a 7 foot football player. You got a green light to shoot that guy from minute one, based on your interpretation of his actions. Now, here we go back to the interpretation of actions.
Right.
And I want to call out cops